As we approach the conclusion of this course, one of the things that we want to do is to make sure to avoid cultural stereotypes. So we will review what our authors in the textbooks have had to say about stereotypes. We'll take a brief look at some ways that negative stereotypes have been portrayed, and then draw some conclusions. Gannon defines a stereotype as a distorted view or mental picture of groups and their supposed characteristics on the basis of which one tends to evaluate individuals from each group. Pillai adds to that, stereotypes happen when we take one or two experiences with a member of a group and apply our impressions to the whole group. Livermore says, all of the usual cautions about not stereotyping apply here. It's dangerous to assume that all Norwegians like fish, or that all Koreans prefer hierarchical leaders. But it's even more dangerous to assume that you can categorize more than 7 billion people into 10 general clusters. And it's never appropriate to describe an entire cultural group with negative, judgmental descriptions such as, blank people are all lazy and corrupt. In light of what we have seen in our history books, we've got to be very careful not to attribute negative stereotypes to different cultures and different clusters. You will note the negative stereotypes used in this Nazi propaganda from the 1930s and early 1940s, in which Jews have overly large noses, Africans have overly large lips, and they are negatively compared with rats and with cockroaches. Please keep in mind as you're viewing this slide that it is not intended to be offensive to anyone, but to illustrate national stereotypes, and in this case, national stereotypes as they go on holiday. Stereotypes are not always cross-cultural or based on ethnicity or nationality. Sometimes they are a subculture within our own group. We've got to be very careful not to assume and not to assign negative stereotypes. Sometimes we know just enough about a culture to make ourselves dangerous when it comes to assuming negative stereotypes. For example, when it comes to occupations, if we assume that all Dutch people are either prostitutes or drug dealers, that's a negative stereotype. Or that all Mexicans are migrant workers, or that all Filipinos work in the aerospace industry, or that all Germans work for engineering firms or car companies, or that all Japanese work for electronics design or car companies. These are negative occupational stereotypes, and these must be avoided as well. We have to get to know people individually and not assume that we know them. We've got to interact with people individually and build relationships with them. The Venn diagram on this slide is a representation of Google searches about Muslims, Christians, Jews, and Buddhists. It is not necessarily representative of who Christians are, who Muslims are, who Jews are, but they are born out of stereotypes, religious stereotypes, by those who have done Google searches. So here are some guidelines for avoiding cultural stereotypes. First of all, interact with people. Don't just assume that you know them because you see what they look like or where they're from. Intentionally build relationships with them. Part of the way to do that is to ask questions. Be like the inquisitive child who asks a lot of questions. Avoid assumptions. Avoid the idea that just because they are from a certain place, that they're just like somebody else that you met from that certain place. Pay attention to nonverbal cues. Not everything that you pick up is going to be done so because somebody explains it to you. Sometimes you simply have to watch and pick up those cues. And then finally, once you discover that you have made a verbal mistake or a behavioral mistake, said something that you shouldn't have said or done something that you shouldn't have done, learn from it. And so the next time when you realize, hey, I need to take my shoes off as I come in the door, then make sure that you do that. Learn from your mistakes. And when people of other cultures recognize that you are making an effort, there is going to be much grace and much forgiveness, and you're going to build a deeper relationship with them.